Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 849B, and today's date is December 22nd, 2015, and the title of the episode is U.S. and the Coalition Forces are moving troops into position for World War III. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, the FDA is receiving, complaints, petitions from citizens saying they're a little confused on what natural means on food labels. And we can see that most of these government agencies basically report to the corporations, and the corporations control what they do. And if the corporations want certain foods or ingredients included in certain labels, the FDA goes ahead and does this. But they're saying that natural, what does that really mean? And I do whatever I possibly can to stay away from all GMO type of foods because they're fooling around with the code of life. They're integrating poisons into that and intertwining that, and we don't know what the effects are going to be in the long term. I also stay away from anything that I can't understand or pronounce, and I like to go with things or foods that I have pretty much in my kitchen. And if I cannot find it, if I can't find an ingredient there, I just don't eat it. But when we look at this, they would like to include GMO ingredients and high fructose corn syrup into the word natural. And as it stands right now, there are corporations, manufacturers, that basically are working with the FDA to have GMO ingredients in the definition of natural. And to me, this is very confusing to everyone. And it seems like the corporations have complete control over the FDA, because right now, if you look at any packages or anything that says natural, you think, oh, it must be all natural. It must be from the earth. It must be something that's not tampered with, that's naturally occurring, growing in nature. But that's not what it means. And we see a lot of the foods today. I mean, they're filled with chemicals. They're filled with everything but food. And Mark Castell of the Cornucopia Institute, a farm advocacy group, says the word natural is nothing but a marketing gimmick to make people believe that they're eating natural foods. Now, Venezuela, they are passing an anti-GMO and anti-patent seed law. And they're basically saying, listen, the creation of a national seed institution will audit and control the seed supply in order to prevent, identify, and punish violations of the GMO ban. So they're going against this. They don't want GMO foods or seeds in their country. We also see this in Russia and China because they turn back all the GMO types of foods. And a lot of European countries are saying we don't want the GMO foods. And we see that corporations, manufacturers, they don't care about the people. They don't care about keeping the people healthy. They just want to make a profit. They just want the cheapest way to make the most profit, and it doesn't matter if it hurts the people. And what we're seeing right now is the food industry is hurting the populations of the world by adding chemicals, by intertwining the foods with poisons. And as time goes on, the populations are going to suffer from this. Now, we know the governments would love to have backdoors into a lot of the software, social media, into our phones, and in a lot of places they already have the backdoors. But we see a lot of companies are fighting back. Now, do we believe them or not? Well, if we take it at face value, they're saying we want strong encryption. And again, I always say we need to take responsibility for ourselves. Make sure we're adding another layer of protection. Make sure that you're using encryption with email. Any way you possibly can. You can go with an email encryption service if you don't want your important information looked at. Use a product like blockitpocket.com. That is a sleeve that you can slip in your credit cards, you can slip in your license, and if you have an RFID chip on any of these cards, it will block the signal. So if you're walking down the street, a scanner cannot steal your information. You can also slip your phone, your iPad into it, and it will block the signal so you cannot be tracked. You can also use Pi, which is an open source code, which is on my site. If you scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side. It's an open source code to encrypt your messages. You can use StartPage, which is startpage.com. That allows you to do searches on the internet without being tracked. You can also use their proxy services. We'll connect you into different proxies, and it will make it look like you are searching from a different location. Now, yes, sometimes it doesn't work out well when you hit a website and you can't get all the information, but there is a trade-off with this. But there are certain ways. But Schumer is urging Senate lawmakers to pass legislation known as the Combat Terrorist Use of Social Media Act of 2015. Which has already received approval from the House of Representatives on December 16th. They're going to modernize the way in which it deciphers, disrupts, and decodes the social media techniques of terrorists. Well, you know what this means. They're going to be looking at all sites. They're going to be looking at all social media, and they're going to determine what is really going on here, and they will block what they need to block. And it's not just going to be terrorists. It's going to be people who don't agree with the government and things like that. Tech giant Apple has called for an overhaul of UK's draft investigatory powers bill, warning the surveillance powers may weaken security for the everyday person. Basically, this bill would give security services and police unfettered access to the records of Britain's web use. And we mentioned this before. And Apple is basically fighting back, saying that, if you halt or weaken encryption, the people that you hurt are not the folks that want to do bad things. It's the good people. The other people know where to go. And this is always absolutely right. This has to do with pretty much everything. Criminals will always find a way. And if they create a backdoor for the government to get in, real cyber criminals will find that back door and they will use it. Right now, there are many tech giants that are fighting back on this. Now, again, we know they've cooperated before with the government, so when we hear these things, we need to be a little cautious. But you have to remember, the government, they will do whatever they possibly can to spy on every single person. Now, there's a new error code. Error 451. And you've seen the error codes 500. You've seen them on my site when something happens, it's attacked or something like that. But this is a new code, 451. And what this new code tells you is that the government is censoring this specific website. The Internet Engineering Steering Group, the IESG, a global body which reviews Internet standards, approved the XML specifications to alert users when a specific website or content on the website is blocked, and this typically means that the government is censoring this information. So if you get an error code 451, this tells you that the government has censored this information and it will not allow you to see it. So the government right now is going to decide what you can and cannot see on the internet. Now, let's take this to books. Can you imagine, and it's already happening, but can you imagine if the government said, okay, and you went into a library or you went on to Amazon, and we know this has already happened with Jim Fetzer's book, and on the label it says 451, you cannot read this book. How would that sit with you? Everyone would have a problem. Well, this is what's happening on the internet. And they're going to censor all different sites and content. Out in Japan, we see Japan's defense budget bill is going to increase and hit an all-time record of 5 trillion yen. This is 41 billion US dollars. Tokyo plans to purchase U.S.-made aircraft to step up monitoring activities in the Senkaku Island area. They're also going to purchase unmanned surveillance aircraft and 4 Osprey tilt-rotor transportation aircraft. And as we know, the people there are still fighting because they do not want a new base in Okinawa. And this is continuing, and we see right now Japan is joining the efforts to provoke China with the United States. Now, out in Afghanistan, we knew the troops were never going to leave Afghanistan. We're seeing that this attack, this latest attack in Afghanistan, is the worst attack yet. And countries like the United States, UK, are saying, okay, we need to bring in more troops. And right now, the UK is going to be sending more advisors, which we know that means they're combat-ready soldiers ready to go to war in Afghanistan. And the U.S. is looking to bring in more troops into this area. We are never leaving the Afghanistan area whatsoever. We see the U.S. has extended Russian sanctions, and we see the EU has extended the sanctions to July 31st of 2016. And we see at this point that Russia's saying this is illogical, it's ineffective, and why is this happening at this point? This does not help the situation, and they're looking at ways to counteract these sanctions. We see Saudi Arabia is using disproportionate attacks in Yemen, and this is coming from UN's Commissioner for Human Rights. And they were there, and they observed with extreme concern incidents of heavy shelling in areas with high concentrations of civilians. They're saying they have witnessed both air and ground attacks that had led to the destruction of wide-range non-military buildings such as schools and hospitals. Remember, the Saudi Arabia, that is the proxy army for the United States. They're also using cluster munitions in this area. Right now, they've estimated there's 2,600 civilians killed. So every time we hear Obama say, well, we don't want to hit the oil rigs in Syria because of civilians, what about Yemen? They're targeting schools and hospitals. So far, 2,600 civilians have been killed. What about those civilians? And this is how you know the United States government is lying. Right now, we see out in Libya, they are getting prepared and ready to go in with bombing runs. How do we know this? Well, we know the unified government agreement was signed. And of course, the elected government kind of said, no, we don't agree to all this. But again, this was signed by a representative which really doesn't support most of the groups there. And at this point, we see that the UK is basically planning on attacking the Islamic State positions in Libya as part of an international coalition force. And they're already drawing up the draft for the UN Security Council, and they're expecting the UN to approve this. And they're saying they can do this because they're supporting the new Libyan government. They don't need their own parliament to approve this because the new Libyan government, the unified government, which is just on paper, which is meaningless, is inviting them in. And who is included in this is the United States, it's France, Italy, and of course the UK. And they're going under the illusionary meme that they're going after the Islamic State. This is the same exact thing they did in Libya once before, and they're also doing in Syria right now. So they're definitely getting ready to go into Libya. And under UN Resolution 2214 offers clear authorization for military action. It asks all countries to fight terrorism in Libya, which represents a clear-cut authorization only requiring different countries to inform the government in Libya in advance and coordinate with it. So the new government is set to take power in January, and we're going to see bombing runs occur in Libya. We knew this was coming. They were planning. France was flying reconnaissance missions. They were building up the forces, and they're getting ready to go into Libya. But what's very interesting about all this is that Tripoli, the elected government in Libya, is saying, okay, we don't want the US here, the UK here. We're going to ask for Russia's help. So the Tripoli government delegation held a meeting with Russian Foreign Ministry officials in Moscow, and they have asked Russia to come in to provide logistical and military support in the fight against terrorism inside the country. The Russian response was that they were ready to help at any time. Here we go once again. Now Russia is going to be in Libya with the UK, US, France, and Italy. Russia is in Syria. So now we have two areas where Russia is going to be and the coalition forces are going to be at the same exact time. And we know the coalition forces are not going after the Islamic State. They're going after the elected government. They want all of those people who oppose this new puppet government out of Libya. That is their entire plan. They have already made preparations to take control of the oil field with the help of their proxy army, the Islamic State. They've already signed agreements so that the only oil can be sold out of the eastern portion of Libya and not out of Tripoli. Everything has been set up for this next wave of attacks in Libya. Now we see that top generals in the United States Armed Forces tried to subvert Obama's policies on Syria. They were giving information via Russia, Israel, and Germany to Assad. And this is coming from a new investigation in the London Review of Books by American journalist Seymour Hersh. So we had Washington on one side, we had the Pentagon on the other, and the Pentagon was not agreeing with what Obama was doing, and they were leaking information. And we'll have to look into this a little bit further to see exactly what has happened there. As Russia continually bombs in Syria, the Islamic State has lost 5,000 square miles of territory, 14% of what they had before. And as it continues, as the bombing runs continue, and the ground forces from Syria move on in, the Islamic State is going to lose more and more territory as time goes on. We see that the terrorist organizations like the Islamic State, al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, they are using the U.S. supplied tow missiles against the Syrian government forces. I thought they were given to the moderates. I guess not. Because you know why? Under the United States, everyone's a moderate. They control all of these groups. This is all part of their plan to get Assad. They want to get Assad because they want a puppet government inside Syria. They eventually want to split up the entire Middle East into Kurdish, Sunni, Shia, and have full control of the entire system. They want to eventually get into Iran. They want all this oil on the dollar. This is what they've been trying to do for a very long time. And we can see they're not going to give up. They're going to continually try and push as hard as they possibly can. Assad is out there saying, listen, over the last year or so, the Western forces were in my country, which I didn't invite them in. They were saying they were hitting the Islamic State, and they've made no gains whatsoever. Russia came in, and after a month, 2 months, 3 months, you can see improvements. You can see that towns and cities were liberated. From the Western world, they destroyed my infrastructure. They destroyed my oil fields. They hurt people. They killed civilians. They allowed the Islamic State to gain more territory. So he's actually calling out the U.S. right now. And he's saying that no one will push him to step down. Only the Syrian people. If they believe he's not a good leader, he said, they can vote me out of office. And we know at this point they're not going to do this. And we know at this time, the United States, they're going with a completely different plan. We know they'll be focusing on Ukraine. They're getting ready for a major offensive. They're focusing on Libya, where they're going to be starting bombing runs. And they're going to be focusing in the Pacific. They're pushing the agenda to start a war. And we know at this point that the government continually lies to us over and over and over again. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former chief of staff to Colin Powell, the guy who wrote Powell's famous speech on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. And guess what he says? There were no weapons of mass destruction. Well, we kind of knew this. Because he went to every person, and everyone I knew, he said, outside of the United States, including 2 people who knew Syria at the time, none of them could confirm for me that Assad used any type of chemical weapons. And he said, frankly, the evidence pointed to the parties that opposed Assad, the Free Syrian Army, at the time. And going forward, it was the Islamic State. All of this is a lie. Remember, the government is going to lie to the people, create fiction to have the people do things they normally wouldn't want to do. People normally don't want to go to war, especially for central bankers for paper and ink, to keep their system alive. So they have to scare the people. I'm reporting right now what the government is doing. These news stories are from around the world and here in the United States. Actually, all the fear-mongering is not coming from me. It's coming from the government. They're the ones who are spreading fear around the globe. They're the ones who are putting out the propaganda to be afraid of the Islamic State. They're the ones who are putting out the propaganda that Russia's coming to get us, that there's Russian aggression, that we need more military assets, that we should bomb different places, we should go to war. All the fear-mongering, all the doomsday, it's all coming from the private Western central bank countries by pushing false flags, by making people afraid, telling us that we need to be afraid, we need to give up our weapons, the terrorists are coming to get us. It's coming from the governments because they need everyone ready and willing to go to war for them. This is why they're doing it. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.